If you've watched a lot of my main channel, you know that I used to post very regularly these educational slash informative slash edutainment videos about the 16 personalities and Myers-Briggs, etc. And I haven't in, I don't even know the last one I did, a year, 2 years ago. And some people sometimes ask, are you going to do that again? Why did you stop? Blah, blah, blah. I just wanted to talk about it. It's something I've been wanting to explain for a while. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it feels like maybe I just shouldn't explain. I don't know, but I'll do it anyway. My whole channel started with those kind of videos, specifically about INFJs. They've always been bordering between like informational and like self-improvement kind of things, because to me a lot of what is interesting about Myers-Briggs is that element of trying to understand yourself better so that you can improve and get unstuck in life and, you know, navigate things better. And to a degree also, I'm not sure this would fall into self-help, maybe to a degree, but to me what became more interesting over time, like very early on in my, you know, journey of learning about this stuff, is figuring out other people. Like the whole bit about let me learn about me, that was interesting for a short amount of time, and then I was just like, I want to figure out what makes other people tick so that I can understand, you know, how to communicate better with them and things like that. Yeah, so that's always been what I've done. And then I started doing the comedy sketches 6 years ago now, and that is really what took off on my channel. And that's always, I always wanted to do comedy anyway. Like the entertainment bit, I think, is what made my channel stand out early on. And the Myers-Briggs niche was and still is pretty small. It's a lot bigger than it was then. But back then, there were not many big channels. And so I think me injecting a little more entertainment into my presentation of stuff about Myers-Briggs helped me to rise more quickly than channels that just kind of did, you know, let's just talk about the nuts and bolts of stuff. So even after I kept doing the sketches, and sorry, like this is another reason why I don't do the like just talking videos like this, is because I just pause in random spots because I can't think of like the next word I want to say. As I kept doing the comedy sketches, I kept up with doing those informational videos. It's kind of hard to call them educational because I've always acknowledged that Myers-Briggs is considered a pseudoscience, which has never bothered me because I think maybe I need to read up more about what pseudoscience is, but it's like if something is presenting itself as being able to do scientific stuff, if something is making big claims without anything to back it up, then yeah, that's pseudoscience. But to me, the way to approach the whole personality stuff is to acknowledge, yeah, it's like pretty fuzzy and maybe there's really nothing to it, but it's still useful at the same time. Like there's this paradox of it's not real, but it is real. So that's why I kind of back off of calling them educational, because it's educational about something that's like anyone can kind of make up stuff about it, and it's just as true as anything else, really. I would make like one a week, one informational video a week. Usually when I was really structured, it was like random comedy sketch on Tuesday, 16 personality sketch on Friday, informational video on Sunday. And they would vary, you know, how serious they got about, you know, how dry the material would be versus if it was something more fun, just to, you know, like more of the listicle ranking kind of things, which I did a few of those, you know, towards the end of it. And those are more fun to do because those are more clearly just for entertainment purposes. And you can slip in a few little nuggets about what the types are like. And I think that's what people like, is kind of learning when learning is the secondary thing. I mean, for sure, the most popular ones I ever did were on their face entertainment. But then I stopped. I'm 5 minutes into this. Why did I stop? So that was all the background. I guess, you know, skip to 5 minutes. You're at the point, so why am I telling you to skip now? I stopped for several reasons. one of which is I didn't enjoy making them anymore. And that's kind of a big thing. You don't want to just keep doing something when you don't enjoy it. And I don't come away with the impression that like I was enjoying it and then I stopped enjoying it and then I stopped making them. No, it was like I stopped enjoying it and then I made them for like 2 more years. And then I was like, I can't push myself to do this anymore. And that's not to say I hated every second of every video I made in that genre, but there were some that were a lot harder to make than others, and some where I was just like, I really hate making this. And then there were others where I was like, oh, that was pretty good. That was fun to make. That was, I felt like I did something there that I was proud of, and that's always nice to do. I feel, comedy sketches are always fun, but when you make a longer video that you feel like really hit it, then you're like, oh, good, I did what I set out to do. Even if it doesn't get a lot of views, it's like, sweet, I accomplished my goal as a creative person, as someone who just wants to put their work out there. But when that split is like, I mean, this is just a made up number, but when it's like 75% slog and 25% enjoyable, it's just like you can't keep up. You can't keep doing it. And I just stopped. And sure, like views dropped off. The thing is, those videos were always way more work to do than the comedy sketches, and they brought in way fewer views. Now, because they were longer, the revenue and the watch time was more. So maybe from a business standpoint, it would be smart for me to go back and do them again. But from just like enjoying the work, I had to stop. And part of the reason I stopped enjoying it is because I kind of ran out of things to say. And, I think people get the idea, I certainly did. And, to some degree I do. Like, there's so many paradoxes in this. I do still. People think that the 16 personality stuff is going to explain everything about you. And it really doesn't. And there's a lot of stuff that's kind of just you, kind of just being a person. So when you just are, or it's like there are so many things that could be part of your personality, but it's not going to be part of everyone who has that same personality type, It can manifest in many different ways. But when you're trying to distill 16 types down to the things that are going to be most relatable to everyone, you're really limited in what you can talk about. And so the number of subjects that you could cover and the number of things you could say and the number of explanations you could give and the number of traits you could describe just were, at least from my point of view, with my amount of knowledge, were getting so low, and I had made so many videos that I was like, I'm just saying the same thing over and over. Now, the part of that is me being a little too perfectionistic, probably because and I've seen this almost from the beginning, is that from my point of view, it feels like everyone who watches my videos has watched all my videos and is aware of all the videos I've made. But the truth is, people who watch my videos have only watched, like, there are some people who have watched all of them, and thank you. But most people don't. And most people aren't even aware of all the videos that are made because the algorithm doesn't show them everything. They're not going to my channel and like, let me watch everything in chronological order. So there's a lot of stuff that people they're not aware. So if you make the same video twice, most people won't realize it. But I've always been afraid to make something twice because I'm afraid of like getting 10,000 comments that say, well, it looks like you've just given up and you're making the same video over again. And honestly, I could probably get away with doing that and only a handful of people would notice. So, but anyway, like I just don't like doing that. I don't like saying something I've said before. And so many things just come down to, when you're talking about 16 personalities, the inferior function is why they have this problem or whatever. It's like, okay, there just didn't seem to be any kind of dramatic tension. Like, why would anyone watch? Everyone knows when they click that the answer is going to be, this is why. Now, I also understand as a viewer, sometimes you want to watch this thing knowing that's sort of the answer, because every time you go over the same material, there might be a little something new added. And so you want to reinforce what you have, but then kind of slowly branch out from that. And if there's maybe some little tidbit that you pick up that sticks with you, that makes it worth it, even if a lot of it is kind of just a review or a retread. But from my creative point of view, I just didn't like doing it. And I also wanted to go deeper, but I found that hard because a lot of people don't want. I guess it's a split in audience, and that kind of led to a problem where I could make videos that were for people who just took the test and had no idea anything, and then you have to kind of stay at this base level, and I feel like that's where most people were, is just like the types, and that's it, and the letters, and that's it. But for me and a lot of other people, I would say a significant minority of viewers, they wanted to get into cognitive functions and the things like that. And it's just hard to appeal to both audiences. And I would always, with anything, as you learn more, you kind of forget what it's like to be a beginner and not understand all of the more intermediate and advanced concepts. And so it was easy for me to always just jump to talking about cognitive functions or these other things. So there was it was a lot of effort that kind of frustrated me into trying to tailor it so that, because I would get comments saying opposite things. Some people saying, I don't understand what you're talking about, and other people saying, this is like too basic, can you go into more detail? And obviously you can't make everyone happy all the time, and I tried to solve it by making some videos that were more in depth and some videos that were not, but it was just too difficult for me. I know it doesn't sound difficult as I explain it, but it was difficult for me to figure out how to balance all that. Then some of the more, so those are like creative and technical things that made me want to stop making them. But then I was also just trying to learn more, and that also kind of led to a dissatisfaction and generally the whole basic understanding of the 16 personalities. And just, I really, I'm not a psychology major or anything. So what I've learned is kind of like secondhand through a lot of various sources. So then I actually went out and read some books by psychologists about things like the unconscious mind and whatever, and cognitive biases and whatever. And here's a couple books that really, I think I had stopped making the videos by then. But when I read these books, I was like, I really can't go back to making them until I figure out how to integrate this new knowledge, because it's difficult to, like, it's one thing to say, hey, this is sort of just like a framework for understanding other people. It's not scientific. Let me teach it to you because it could be helpful, because there are some things that are true in it. But then it's another thing to be like, I know some psychological principles and these things aren't compatible. Like the 16 personalities aren't compatible. The way I was talking about the 16 personalities wasn't compatible with it. I can't do that at that point. So I have to figure out how to put it together. The first book is The Psychology of Judgment and Decision Making, which goes into a lot of cognitive biases and things like that, and basically how you will, and it's been a while since I've read both of these books, but this one is maybe a little bit more on the surface level of things, because it's just talking about how the way that our mind plays tricks on us, basically. I mean, even the cover, the thing about the cover is that the 3 of hearts here is black, and most people, if you just look at it, you won't, if you're asked a question later about it, you won't remember that is black and not red, because your mind just fills it in as red because you see 3 in a heart and you're like, well, it must be red. It's that kind of stuff. And that's Psychology of Judgment and Decision Making by Scott Plous. And these are old books that I got from thrift books, which is always a great spot to get stuff, except it had all of this highlighting in it, and I hate that, because some studies have shown that if you get a book with highlighting in it, it makes you focus on the highlighting more, thinking those are the important parts, even though they might not be. So like as I'm reading it, I'm trying to remind myself, just some moron highlighted this, don't pay extra attention to that, like read the whole book. But then the one that really got me thinking a lot is Strangers to Ourselves, Discovering the Adaptive Unconscious by Timothy Wilson. And look, this book is a little older. I think it's the year 2000 it was published or something. So I also acknowledge, me not being a student of psychology, 2002, this could be like entirely outdated. and people might just say, oh, this is total trash. But still, it gave me a lot to think about. And even in this book, he talks about how stuff about the mind and the unconscious, it's like we don't really understand it. Like these are just a lot of theories, and you try to test them out. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of studies he talks about in here, and this is more in depth because this is like just talking about what the unconscious mind is and how it operates, why it operates that way, and how your unconscious mind and your conscious mind are kind of in, not battle, but they're not working together. Or at least you can't be aware of what your unconscious mind is doing. And that, like, just that basic thing started to make me think, well, when we're usually talking about personality type, at least once you kind of get more into it as a personality nerd, you're talking about your unconscious personality type. And the way that Timothy Wilson talks about it in this book is that you have like these chronic, that's the word he uses, these chronic tendencies to view things and interpret things in a certain way. And because it's unconscious, you don't realize you're doing that. And so you always will, look at things a certain way, which does sound similar to what you're talking about with personality type. And so many of us personality nerds are talking about those unconscious tendencies, those chronic tendencies to prefer to look at things one way or another, to interpret things, through a thinking lens or a feeling lens, etc. But what I realized is a lot of people, when you're taking a self-test for that, you can't test your unconscious personality. You can only test your conscious personality. So everyone kind of has two personality types. And that was a video I thought about making. I was like, oh, maybe I'll go back and make an educational video. Maybe I will one day, although I'm spoiling it here. But everyone has two personality types. You have your conscious one that you think you're trying to operate under, and then you have your unconscious one that's really doing everything. And there can be overlap, and it could even be the same personality type. But that gave me a lot of compassion, because when you're a personality nerd and you think you know stuff, you really look down on the dummies who are saying, the 10,000 people who are like, I'm an INFJ, I'm rare, every day on the 16 personalities thing. But consciously, who's to say they're not? On their conscious mind, their unconscious mind may not be INFJ, but consciously that's how they see themselves. And why, who am I to say no? And even before that, like I've never been one to like try to, what's the word I'm looking for, to put down anyone because of what type they think they are, even if I'm like, well, clearly you're not that. It's like, what's the point? Who cares? Yeah, so everyone's got to, that was also, I guess that's also part of why I stopped making the videos, is I was just kind of wondering about the ethics of it. Like there's one thing to be like, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. That's not quite an ethical thing, but I just didn't want to try to tell people who they were anymore. I guess that's, even though no one was listening, like I guess I was just also frustrated because the times when I would try to be like, this is what this type is like, there was just a lot of pushback on everything I said, which is fine. But that just always bothered me to feel like I was trying to share something, and then people who clearly like just took the test and they were like, well, this type is me, and whatever I disagree with and whatever's not how I interpret me to be is wrong. That just got annoying, But it was very common. It was a very common kind of thing that happened. But there are so many studies that Wilson talks about in here that made me think, dang, there's a lot more going on. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit, so let me back up. So the ethics thing, there is a study in here that made me think about the ethics of it. So I'll get to the ethics in a minute. But one more thing about like the alternate way of looking at personality types that I wanted to get into that kind of undercut what before is, there's the Jungian, the whole thing comes from Carl Jung, and he wrote the psychological types, and his whole thing was you have the shadow type, and your mind is trying to repress this side of you. And, that kind of evolved into the 16 personalities and all that. And so it all has to do with repression and the idea of this inferior function that you are like trying to ignore, that there's some kind of thing, like you don't you can't acknowledge this unconscious part of yourself because it would be too painful. Your brain is trying to protect you and all that stuff. And that always kind of like never clicked for me. Like I understood it, but it just never felt totally right, because I'm like, really, like what is there to repress when it comes to like, especially with like intuition and sensing? It's like, why is my mind saying you have to like repress the sensory? So the idea put forth in this book is more like your unconscious mind is just keeping a lot of, like, you just don't understand a lot of yourself because it's unconscious, and you just don't, it's just unconscious. That's it. Like, you just have no access to it. It's not like any kind of reason. It's not like your psychology is trying to protect you. It's just like you don't know. So it's operating on its own wavelength, and you don't know what's going on. Now, you could argue that it still is somewhat compatible, because it's like, well, if I'm a feeler unconsciously, that still creates this thing where I'm chronically depending on interpreting things in that feeling way, which is not necessarily like suppressing thinking to keep me safe or something, but it's just neglected because the chronic tendency is to do the other thing. So it's not like entirely incompatible, but the whole idea of Jung's shadow self and whatever, I just don't think it works with my view of personality types anymore. And like, that's a pretty big thing to say, like, this whole thing that's built on Jung's ideas, I reject that. I reject Jung's ideas. I still think that there's something valuable with the personality types, though. I just don't think that we need all the Jungian psychology. I think that we can update it and have it be a little bit more modern, and not just like, I think that would make it feel a lot less pseudoscientific also. It probably still would be pseudoscience, but, you know, when we stop talking about, not that I think Jung's shadow self and whatever is wrong. I think that it can have, it can be good for, self-help and improvement and things like that. I just don't think that it's something that I want to incorporate anymore in my thinking about the 16 personalities. So that's pretty big. That's like, it's knocking out a pillar from under it. And I just don't understand enough. Like, this book made me realize, like, I just don't understand enough about any of this stuff to make... It's like, why would I just don't want to teach people stuff when there's so many things that I'm aware of now that I don't know. And obviously I knew back then that I didn't know a ton about psychology, but I thought it was okay because I was like, there were definite boundaries of where I was like trying to keep how much it would explain about stuff. But now, as you learn more, you realize how much more there is that you don't know. And then the ethics of it, which I mentioned before. One thing that there's a study they talk about in here that is, let's see, what I should have written this down, shouldn't I have? But basically, there was a study, the Pygmalion effect, the Rosenthal-Jacobson study, which is famous, and it has been criticized a lot because I don't think anyone's been able to replicate the results, but it still was like, what's the word? It affected me. But basically, it was like kids in a classroom, students in a classroom. I don't know how old they were, elementary school, high school, I don't know. But they were given an IQ test. The control group, the teachers were given the scores, like the real scores. But in the test group, the teachers were given different, like random scores. And then at the after a certain period of time, the students were retested, and there were, was there any improvement, or did they stay the same? And in the control group, where the teachers had the right scores, they were basically the same. They tested the same. But in the control group, or in the test group, when they did the retest, students who actually had like a lower score, but the teachers thought they had a high score, suddenly their IQ score went up when they were retested. It's called the Pygmalion effect. And again, it is criticized sometimes. But then it's also related to sort of like the observer expectancy effect, where just by, which is talking more about we're talking about more like experiments, where if the experimenter is thinking there's going to be a certain outcome, the participant, might be influenced unconsciously to give that result. Which made me start to think like, dang, is it ethical for people to think that they are a personality type? And this has been like a criticism of Myers-Briggs that I've seen before, just not put in this way, where people are like, people shouldn't be put in a box and whatever. I even made a video back in 2020 that was criticizing this article this guy wrote. He was a psychologist, but he was like, don't teach your kids don't let them take the Myers-Briggs test, because it's just going to limit them and put them in a box. And I still think that article I have to go back and reread it, but at the time, it just wasn't addressing things in a way that it just felt very dismissive. But I guess it's essentially what I'm saying now. I guess it's because I approached it just feeling like it's not putting me in a box, because I don't really feel like it's telling me anything I didn't know already. And maybe maybe this applies more to younger people. I just was like, do I want someone to think that they are a sensing type or an intuitive type, and then they just kind of like reinforce stereotypes because they think they are that, or a feeler or a thinker, or judging or perceiving? And you don't, on the internet, there's such a lack of control, like in what I'm saying, of what they pick up about what each type is like. And so do I want someone to think that they are these very specific stereotypes, and not like I was trying to say stereotypes, but occasionally I would mention stereotypes, and even saying like, it's just a stereotype, it's not everyone. It's not like people will still just latch onto that and be like, that's what it is, that's what this type is. So do I want someone to think I'm an ESFJ, so I love cake now, And this person could have been some totally different type, but now they just got it in their head that this is who I am. So yeah, maybe I owe that guy an apology for saying don't let your kids take the Myers-Briggs, because I probably am not going to teach my kids about the personality stuff, at least not till they're much older. I think that it's something that you really should only get into if you treat it as like, well, who knows if this is real, and treat it with, I think people do not treat it with enough skepticism. It's like people are either like, yes, this is me, or like, no, I reject everything about this, and I feel like you can still go into it and be like, this is interesting, let me learn about this, what could this teach me about myself? And it could all be fake. Like, can we have a bit of this paradoxical thinking here? But yeah, that gave me a big question mark about if I even wanted to keep doing it. Plus, it's also just like there's just so much misinformation about everything now, and especially with things like TikTok and whatever, where you have these influencers who are just like spreading conspiracy theories all the time, and young kids just pick up on them without questioning it. And I'm just like, even though I think that you can responsibly use the personalities, when a young person is in that kind of environment where they're just like believing all these things that aren't true, I don't want my messaging to be part of that, and for them to approach it without the same skepticism that I have, which I feel like keeps me enough of a distance away from it for it to be a useful tool without it like defining my worldview, Even though it probably does seep into my worldview all the time, I try to be conscious of it and keep it at bay, but I just don't think a lot of people use it that way, which I just don't feel comfortable with. And which is why the 16 Personalities comedy sketches, I think, are more fun, because it's like, you can make fun of all of it, and it's just for entertainment. And if people want to identify with it, that's fine. But it's not like telling people this is who you are. And I think there's an alienation effect in it to a degree, because people realize like, yeah, I'm kind of like that, but it's funny, haha. I'm not really always like that, Yeah, so that's why I stopped making them. And will I make them again? Maybe one day, if I felt like I could incorporate this new knowledge into it. But as for now, no. And I don't regret making them. I don't think that they're videos that I wish I would take down now, but I just don't feel like making any more for the time being. So that's why I don't. And thanks for watching.